I'm Wallace Russell, and on behalf of the Iowa State University and the College of Sciences and Humanities, I want to welcome you to this dedication ceremony for Earl D. Ross Hall. The Reverend Lester L. Moore will lead us in the invocation.
Let us pray. God of our fathers, we offer heartfelt thanks for all those who have shared in making this dedication possible. Those who had a sense of purpose to plan toward this day, and those who have provided funds to make it a reality. Especially do we offer thanks for the life and contribution of Earl D. Ross to this university and to the many lives that were entwined with his own. His sharing of himself with the university community has left a gentle touch on these halls of learning that will enhance each one of us through the years. May this structure of steel and stone be the impetus for much learning. May the students and the teachers who use it over the years be imbued with the same dedication to scholarship that has been the hallmark of Dr. Ross. Keep us aware that in all of our learning, we need understanding, and that knowledge without love is a wasted pursuit. May each person who enters this building seeking knowledge heed and understand the injunction of the carpenter from Nazareth, that you shall know the truth, and the truth will make you free. As we dedicate this building, we also dedicate ourselves to a renewing of mind and spirit. In the Master's name we pray. Amen.
While many of us who are here understand the significance of this occasion, I think we should also be aware that there are untold others who couldn't be here today who do appreciate its significance. I have one telegram from Senator Gale McGee, United States Senator from Wyoming, and he wires us as follows. Dr. Earl Ross was professor of American history when I was a professor in the history department at what was then known as Iowa State College. At that time, 1943 and 1944, Dr. Ross was an institution, even then. He was greatly admired by all who had come to know him in the academic community and was held in high regard and esteem. His reputation continued to be enhanced throughout his years of devotion to the academic profession. Therefore, it is fitting that today you are dedicating Ross Hall in his memory. It is also fitting that the building which houses the departments of history, political science, philosophy, and English has been chosen to bear his name. Ross Hall will stand as a living tribute to a man who had a tremendous impact on his students, his associates, and his colleagues in the academic field. I only regret that I am unable to be there today and to participate in the ceremonies. Sincerely, Gale McGee, U.S. Senator. Now may I introduce the president of our university, Dr. Robert Parks, who will perform the building dedication. Dr. Parks.
Thank you very much, Dean Russell, Mrs. Earl Ross, and members of the Ross family, Dr. Geiger, ladies and gentlemen. It's a sincere pleasure for me to participate in this ceremony, a ceremony to honor a very dear friend of mine, his memory, his contribution and in a sense also to honor the 4 departments, all of which mean a great deal to me personally and to this university, who will be housed in this building. Earl D. Ross came to the history department at Iowa State University in 1923, beginning an association that was to last 50 years. His reputation as a scholar was not limited to this university, for which he was the official historian. His writings in agricultural history and on the land-grant system of higher education earned him a national reputation. Although he retired from active teaching in 1956, he continued to have a part in the life of this university. He had a major role in Iowa State's centennial observance in 1958, for which he produced an excellent book called The Land-Grant Idea at Iowa State College. And in the years since, he continued to be the university historian, a service he had performed for 34 years at the time of his death last March. With his sense of humor, he surely would have been amused at the coincidence, or perhaps he would have called it the historical accident, inherent in the death of the university historian on the very day that marked the 115th anniversary of the founding of the Iowa State. In retrospect, there is some pleasure in the knowledge that Mr. Ross was aware that this new building was to be named in his honor, for the official approval to do so was granted by the State Board of Regents just 13 days before his death. I think, too, that Dr. Ross appreciated what this building symbolizes with respect to the recent development of the university. I refer to the fact that the building will house the departments of English, History, Political Science, and Philosophy, departments which have grown rapidly as this university has broadened its offerings in the humanities. It was only 4 years ago that these units were separated into distinct departments. Before 1969, English was paired with speech to form one department, and history, government, and philosophy constituted a single department. 10 years ago, the Department of English and Speech and the Department of History, Government, and Philosophy had a total enrollment of 302 undergraduates and 11 graduate students. Last fall, the 4 departments which will occupy this building had 662 undergraduate majors and 144 graduate students. The development of these departments typifies the broadening and expanding of opportunities which have been characteristic of Iowa State throughout its history and characteristic of the land-grant system of higher education in this country. In his book, Democracy's College, one of the finest accounts of land-grant education, Dr. Ross described the land-grant colleges as a peculiarly American institution which developed under native conditions and provided an essential element in the national educational system. In method, curriculum, organization, and purpose, the land-grant college was distinctly American and came into being when traditional instruction was out of harmony with the needs and desires of mid-century America. Dr. Ross wrote of the trials and trends in the developing land-grant institutions, recalling disputes that arose over such things as subject matter to be offered in the colleges and the relative merits of research and teaching. As the institutions expanded their functions and broadened their outlook, there was agitation to change the name from Agricultural College to State College or State University. Here is what Dr. Ross had to say about that, and I quote, "Whatever the name, the real test of all land-grant institutions was their ability and disposition to fulfill their peculiar mission in the new era. And it was in ministering to the technical, social, and political needs of the nations come of age that they attained measurably to the vision of the true prophets of the industrial movement in becoming real people's colleges, with all of their limitations, a distinct native product and the fullest expression of democracy in higher education." End of quotes. Iowa State is a part of this proud tradition, this proud land-grant tradition, and it is appropriate that this university should have supplied perhaps the foremost historian of the land-grant system, one on whose work subsequent historians will have to build. Allan Nevins, who later published a set of lectures called The State Universities and Democracy, said in a letter to Dr. Ross that the Ross book was a mainstay in Nevins's preparation of the lectures. And in the centennial observance here in 1958, the president of the University of Minnesota, Dr. Lou Morrill, called Dr. Ross, quote, "the first authoritative historian of the land grant system. When the 100th anniversary of the Morrill Act was observed in 1962, Dr. Ross was a consultant to the land grant centennial. That kind of recognition was not confined to the land grant writings of Dr. Ross. There is in our university library a letter from another noted historian, Henry Steele Commager, in which he says to Dr. Ross, I quote, "I suppose it would not be an exaggeration to regard you as the father of agricultural history in the U.S., end of quotes. Those who have come to this university in the recent years when Dr. Ross was less active may know him only for his histories of Iowa State and for Democracy's College. In fact, for a new staff member unfamiliar with Iowa State's history and the land grant tradition, the Ross book, The Land Grant Idea at Iowa State College, ought to be required reading. But the diversity of his historical work is evident in the entries under his name in the university library. That reputation as the father of agricultural history in the U.S. was won by a volume of readings in the economic history of American agriculture, of which he was a joint editor, his book on a century of farming in Iowa, and other writings on the role of agriculture in the American economy. His writing ranged from the liberal Republican movement to a history of the Red Cross in Ames, from a history of graduate study at Iowa State to the establishment of the first cooperative creamery in Iowa, from the Iowa State Fair to the diary of Benjamin Gew, the Iowa legislator who was largely responsible for the establishment of this institution. If I had known Dr. Ross in no other way, I would have been grateful to him for his perception of the perils of the presidency at this institution. Every man who has occupied the position must have felt that he served in the most difficult of all possible times. The Ross histories of Iowa State make it apparent that every president endures similar tests: student protests, dissident faculty, disgruntled townspeople, unhappy alumni, legislators, and regents, disagreements over curriculum, athletics, student rules and regulations. They're all to be found recurring through Iowa State's history. I'm rather certain, however, that they were not so amusing at the time as they were in Mr. Ross's objective and retrospective view of those occurrences. The Ross touch is to be seen in a few of his observations of Iowa State in the years immediately following World War II. On the fact that there had been no abridgment of academic freedom during the national obsession with communism, Professor Ross made this observation: the college was thus spared the unfortunate notoriety of an investigation by a committee of the AAUP than which, in the opinion of a veteran educator, any president would prefer the infliction of the plagues of Egypt, end of quote. On student behavior, Dr. Ross hit this optimistic note. I quote him, "The curve of student conduct, like the imaginarily conceived curve of social progress, shows marked ups and downs with a general upward trend over the long span, subject intermittently to sudden and disruption reversions," end of quotes. Of faculty salaries, I'm sure he endeared himself to all faculty everywhere when he wrote this, and I quote, "Professional dignities, however pleasing otherwise, should not become a substitute for commensurate material rewards." End of quote. It was my good fortune, however, that my acquaintance with this man was not limited to his books. I knew Dr. Earl D. Ross very well. I knew him as a friend and as a colleague on the faculty in what was then the History and Government Department here at Iowa State University. He was a gentle person, a kindly man. His keen sense of humor was not overworked, but it would show itself now and again in delightfully unexpected times and places. Although his enormous talent and his great accomplishments towered over almost everyone with whom he came in contact, Professor Ross was an extremely modest man. He seemed to derive more genuine pleasure from a minor success by one of his colleagues in the department than from a major accomplishment of his own. All of us younger and far less talented members of the History and Government Department looked upon Professor Ross as our intellectual mentor and father confessor. He was first to report favorable comments that he heard on our teaching. He could usually manage to see promise in the limited and sometimes rather dull journal articles that we produced. But we all realized that Earl Ross was no pushover. We all knew that kindly and supportive as he was, we just couldn't take his approval for granted. For Earl Ross, an extremely patient man in most things, could become very impatient indeed with what he considered to be shoddy scholarship. Therefore, those of us who treasured his friendship and the warmth of his professional encouragement were just a little fearful that his demanding sense of scholarship might sometime override his gentleness and his supportiveness toward his junior colleagues. I remember well the time when I was scheduled to give a paper at what was then called the Social Science Seminar on a subject which, unhappily for me, Professor Ross knew a great deal about. Savoring some possible drama in this situation, one of my colleagues asked me, "What will you do if Mr. Ross stands up and challenges you on some point?" I might say parenthetically, I think that was a hokey thing to do, this colleague of mine, because I was then a young associate professor in the early 30s, and here was a big opportunity to impress my colleagues in the social sciences, and just about to go on the program, sort of flexing my muscles and trying my voice, so to speak, and here this colleague, another associate professor, my office mate as a matter of fact, has to put this unnerving question to me. But it may be comforting to you to know that retribution does exist, that this former office mate is being properly punished. He is now serving his term as president of his sister Big 8 University. At any rate, he asked me this question: what will you do if Mr. Ross stands up and challenges you on some point? And I say with a great deal of immodesty that I think my answer was a very intelligent one. I said, if this happens, I will retreat. Not gracefully, not strategically, but with the greatest possible speed. Perhaps that occasion proved that charity, after all, was Dr. Ross's overweening virtue, because he did not challenge me and I was saved the embarrassment of hasty public retreat. Earl Dudley Ross loved Iowa State with a genuineness which can only arise from a broad and deep understanding of the institution itself. As a talented and hard-working official historian of Iowa State, he undoubtedly knew more about the history of the university than any other person who ever lived. He recorded this institution's great triumphs and unfortunate blunders. He, perhaps more than anyone else, fully understood this institution's strengths and its weaknesses. But when he added it all up, the answer was clear and compelling to Dr. Ross. Iowa State University was, in truth, a great university to which he was happy to make whatever contributions he could. Today, the university community formally recognizes those great contributions which Earl Dudley Ross so unselfishly made to the educational development, happiness, and well-being of his thousands of students and his professional colleagues on this faculty and throughout the world. So on behalf of the entire university community, it is with the deepest personal pleasure that I dedicate this new classroom and office building as the Earl D. Ross Hall. I thank you. Thank you. I understand that I have one more assignment, and that is to unwrap whatever is contained here. This is the plate. Well, it's really phony. It's a fake, but a bronze plate, looking just this sort, will be installed properly on the building. Note this as the Ross Hall.
Thank you, President Parks. It was my misfortune never to meet Earl Dudley Ross in person, but I can confirm from experience the desirability of your suggestion that it be required reading, his histories be required reading for new staff members. I am a new staff member at Iowa State, and last fall I prepared for my duties by vacationing on the north shore of the island of Sicily in the Mediterranean. And among the 40 pounds of reading material I brought along and paid extra freight on the airplane for were the histories of Iowa State College by Earl Dudley Ross. And I read those histories on a sunny balcony on the north shore of Sicily in the little town of Cefalù. I found them very enlightening, and my view of Iowa State is bathed in Mediterranean sun and influenced by the optimism that Earl Ross did show throughout his writings. I couldn't have survived without that assignment. Dr. Parks has indicated the tremendous growth in the areas of the humanities and the social sciences within this university and within the College of Sciences and Humanities. I think the occupation of this building by the departments of history and English and political science and philosophy is a major step in this continuing maturation process. I'm sure that each one of the executive heads of those departments have many words that they would like to express in appreciation of these new quarters. I'd like now, however, to introduce the historian who would have been in the history department as we now know it. And the chairman of that department is Dr. Louis G. Geiger, who will say a few words for us. Geiger.
Thank you, Dean Russell and President Parks. Also address these to President Parks, Mrs. Ross, members of the Ross family, and colleagues. I speak for the departments of English, History, Philosophy, and Political Science, and I say that we are deeply grateful to the people of Iowa for providing this new facility for teaching and study. We are also mindful of the symbolic importance of this event, which has been remarked upon. 4 years ago, 3 of the 4 departments were a sort of academic conglomerate. Indeed, until the 1960s, all 4 departments that will be housed here were mainly service agencies providing basic general education for students whose interests lay elsewhere, mainly in science and technology. General education is an honorable university mission, and we shall continue to discharge it. But we are now also well along into a new era of independent or co-equal status in the academic family of Iowa State University. Both the move to facilities built especially for us and the naming of an important building for a noted historian who lived and worked here are giant steps toward implementing the new humanism of which the President has spoken on other occasions. We are likewise taking a giant step toward completing this institution's transition into a university in the fullest sense of the term. This is a great day for the future occupants of this building, a day of fulfillment, in entering new quarters designed for us, and in assuming an enlarged role and enlarged responsibilities at Iowa State University.
And now it's my pleasure to introduce Mr. Ron Ross, who will say a few words for the family.
Dean Russell, President Parks, friends. The Earl D. Ross family comes to this memorable occasion, as you can well imagine, with mixed emotions. We're sad that my father cannot be here to participate in this ceremony and to acknowledge for himself the great honor you're doing him. But we do rejoice in the news, as President Parks has reported. The naming of the building came at a time that my father was aware of it, and we are very happy that his last days were cheered by the news of the naming of Earl D. Ross Hall. I cannot, of course, tell you what my father might have said here to you today. I can, however, I think, briefly suggest a couple of ideas, though, that I'm sure he would have found congenial. Some of my earliest memories, certainly my earliest memories of this campus, are visits to the office of the old History and Government Department up on the
southeast corner of the third floor of Beardshire, or Central as it was then known. My father was proud of the department. He drew great pleasure and inspiration from a succession of able colleagues who served with him over several decades. Although, as has been mentioned, the History and Government Department was a supporting or a service department, developed a unique and notable group of staff alumni, young staff members who went on to outstanding careers. President Parks is only one of several who became university presidents. Others went on to distinguished careers in teaching and scholarship. And one former staff member of the department, from whom we received a telegram, is now serving his third term in the U.S. Senate, where he is chairman of a major committee. Now, the high caliber of the History and Government staff, of course, was a tribute to the leadership of the late Professor Louis Bernard Schmidt and his successor, the late Dr. Clarence H. Madison. In recalling the old department, I'm sure my father would want me to note the long service of two good friends and able colleagues, Herbert C. Cook and V. Alton Moody. Although we are pleased, as my father was, at the recognition and the emphasis provided by separate departments of history, political science, and philosophy. These departments actually are heirs to a noble tradition, a noble heritage from the old History and Government Department. In his centennial history of Iowa State, my father wrote about the time in the 20s when a distinguished group of university presidents came to Iowa State to investigate how well the college was fulfilling its mission, a mission very narrowly defined in those days. One chapter of the report of the investigation expressed great alarm at what was seen as a threat that liberal arts might be smuggled into Iowa State's curriculum. Recalling my father's sense of humor, I'm sure that he would want me to suggest to you that in the context of efforts to smuggle the liberal arts into Iowa State, he would hope that Earl D. Ross Hall might become a den of smugglers. When my father launched his teaching career more than 30 years ago, modern academic specialization had not developed. A professor of history ranged widely through the liberal arts and humanities. It was also a time when it was not considered irrelevant for a history professor to comment on such matters as grammar, punctuation, and spelling. My father's generation of teachers predated the modern notion, which seems to be that literacy is a concern solely of the English department. I should hasten to add at this point, however, that I don't believe that it was only his concern for language that led my father in 1917 to marry a professor of English at Missouri Wesleyan College, where they both were teaching. I can assure you, however, that the professor of English, my mother, is pleased that Earl D. Ross Hall will house not only the departments of history, of political science, and of philosophy, but also the English department. The principal message that I bring you from the Earl D. Ross family is one of gratitude. We are grateful to the Board of Regents, to President Parks, and to all who participated in the naming of Earl D. Ross Hall. We are grateful to President Parks, Dr. Geiger, Lester Moore, and Dean Russell for their participation in this very moving ceremony today. And we are grateful to all of you, colleagues, students, friends of my father who have gathered here. To all of you and to each of you, our thanks. I have been asked to introduce members of the family who are here. I think many, if not most of you, certainly know Mrs. Earl D. Ross, my mother, who's been active in the community here for within a few months of half a century. Mother. My sister Betsy, Mrs. Jack E. Bea of Ann Arbor, Michigan. My brother, Dr. Bruce M. Ross of the Psychology Department, the Catholic University of America in Washington. My wife, Ann, who is also a member of the Iowa State class of 1943 and who is chief of the Sociology Division of the Martin Luther King Jr. Memorial Library, the public library of the District of Columbia. Ann? Betsy's husband, Jack E. Bea, chief engineer of Cartret Incorporated of Ann Arbor, Michigan. Our small rogues gallery here, the Three Musketeers, our daughter Elizabeth from New York, Ron Jr., who is working on his doctoral dissertation in environmental toxicology at the University of California at Davis. Stand up. And our son Carl, who is a senior at Penn State. And we were delighted to have arrived in time for the ceremony, two cousins, and great favorites of my father, Mrs. Beth Ross Moore of Minneapolis, and Harold Ellis Ross of Springfield, Massachusetts. Again, to all of you, from all of us, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Ross, for your words and your introductions. I'm sure we'll all look forward to getting better acquainted with the family at the refreshment period, which will follow the ceremony immediately in the room just across the hall, in room 127. I hope we'll see you all there. Only yesterday I was defending the idea of ceremony from a psychologist's point of view with Professor Shakeshaft of the Political Science Department, and I said that ceremony justified itself because it brought about heightened discrimination of significant life events. Good psychologies. Professor Shakeshaft was somewhat indignant. He said that it wasn't necessary to defend ceremony before a political scientist and a specialist in English political history. He said, didn't you know that Western civilization was glued together by ceremony? I think one of the virtues of ceremony is that it can do all of those things and has done all of those things. It's also virtuous if ceremonies, I think, are short. We have accomplished this ceremony in a little over a half an hour. I thank you all for coming and hope we'll get better acquainted during the refreshment period. Thank you.